there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1999 wrestling documentary, Beyond the Mat. Now, before I go any further sharing my thoughts on this film, I would like to give a special shout out to Brock yet again for requesting another review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you would like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. The link to both will be in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Now, Beyond the Mat is well known inside wrestling fan circles as one of the first wrestling documentaries to really expose a part of the industry and a part of the business that hadn't really been talked about that much. The part that broke kayfabe. And not only that, show the genuine brutality of the sport, as well as showing these wrestlers who were larger than life figures as humans and people with flaws, and it alongside another documentary that came out around the same time called Wrestling with Shadows, uh, Bret the Hitman Hart. Uh, it really did usher in a new era of wrestling documentaries that would really hit its peak fairly recently with Vice's series, The Dark Side of Wrestling. Now, Beyond the Mat, in a lot of ways, is a passion project from the film's writer and director, Barry Blaustein. And that's honestly the biggest reason why the film even got made, is because Barry had enough pull in the industry as a writer and as a guy who was sort of an insider in Hollywood, knew the right people. He was able to get a hold of some funding. I think it was like $500,000 from Ron Howard or Imagine Entertainment, and he worked on this film for multiple years. In fact, he started shooting the film and putting it all together 3 years before the film was actually finalized and released. And that shoestring nature really is something that stands out when it comes to this documentary. And I think it adds some charm to it at times, but there are other moments, especially when it comes to the directing, where it's kind of a flat looking documentary. The opening scene is supposed to be like a flashback to when Barry was a kid, and it's super low budget and it really looks cheap, and it's not the best direction in those scenes. It really is something that comes across as kind of amateur. And when you get to the rest of the film, which features various different interviews with different wrestlers, like Terry Funk and Mick Foley and Spike Dudley and China and New Jack and so on. And of course, Jake the Snake Roberts, he's one of the more infamous interviews in this documentary. When you get to all these interviews, there's not really a lot of variety in the way that they're shot. When it comes to the sequences that are shot inside the WWF offices or in other locales, it's also pretty stock, pretty standard, kind of fair. Uh, I think a lot of it's more trying to be realistic than anything. So there's not really a lot of style or theatrics, which I think for a documentary about wrestling, that's kind of something that I feel a wrestling documentary kind of needs. You need the theatrics because that's what wrestling in a lot of ways is. So to have just a film visually that's just kind of run of the mill, middle of the mat, kind of really the wrestling documentary representative of jabroni. It just means that you have a film that, despite its willingness to showcase elements of the sport and the entertainment industry that is wrestling, that a lot of people weren't willing to shed light on, it's just not really a looker visually. It's not a great looking movie. And it doesn't really have a lot of direction or visuals that really make it flashy or stand out, or really make it an automatic winner from a visual perspective. The direction is okay, but it's just not anything that is really that spectacular. And I think with a more accomplished director, I think Barry, I think his writing is a little bit better, but even that's a little disappointing, and I'll get to that later. And I think a lot of it might just have to do with the budget. It's a really low budget production, so maybe you couldn't have the type of high flying cinematography or direction, or really take a lot of risks visually because they didn't have the budget. Um, but it does come across almost like you're watching a student film at times. It really has that vibe, like you're watching some kind of documentary that a student made in college. Now, yeah, the script by Barry Blaustein. There are a lot of moments where the screenplay is just downright corny. I'm just gonna admit it. It's really cornball. Like the opening scene, the ending, some of the other ways that he inserts himself into the narrative and focuses on his sense of humor, which I didn't find funny at all. I just found it to be really lame. It was just one of those things where I know it's a passion project of his, but at the same time, you kind of got to know that maybe you're not necessarily the guy who should be the narrator. Don't have much experience narrating for a reason, because he's a pretty boring narrator. And on top of that, you lack a certain authenticity and seriousness that you would get from a narrator who, I don't know, actually knows what they're doing. Like, Jesse Ventura is interviewed in this. Why not hire Jesse Ventura to narrate the wrestling documentary? That alone would have improved this film for me. Is to have like Jesse Ventura be the narrator. Um, I get why Blaustein is there, because he's the one that's putting his boots on the ground, and he's going over to interview all these wrestlers and going out of his way with Jake the Snake Roberts and Terry Funk and Mick Foley and so on and so forth. It's a very personal project, but at the same time, I think sometimes you got to know when to like separate the personal stuff and focus on you know, the 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 main attraction, the main draw. And the main draw with Beyond the Mat is the wrestling stuff. And I'm just not as enthusiastic about the moments where Blaustein is turning the camera essentially on himself and talking about his adventures or his experiences with wrestling. And I think there really is too much of that in this screenplay. And it also suffers from a lack of a real narrative. A lot of the best documentaries have some semblance of a narrative. They kind of do have a plot. You know, things go from point A to point B to point C. There's a clear message that's being that is being conveyed. There's a lot of things that are more concise and to the point. A lot of the themes or the subtext or the topics of discussion for this documentary, they're very scattered. They're not very focused. And it just makes everything come across as very vague and just kind of messy in terms of what the whole point of the documentary is. Having the whole setup of, well, what makes these wrestlers do the crazy things that they do in the ring, and how are they just able to return to normal lives, or what do they do when they're not wrestling? Like that's only surface level stuff. That's like bare minimum stuff. That's not really enough to justify a feature length documentary on its own. Like, you have to provide a little bit more than that. And Blaustein never really provides that. It's just the same sort of vague commentary about wrestling and the business and so on. I think what he was trying to do is show that these wrestlers, despite them being these larger than life personalities in the ring, there's a contrast between them inside the ring and outside of it, showing that when these wrestlers aren't wrestling, they're just like, your normal Joe or your normal average Jane, that kind of thing. But other than maybe a few instances, you didn't necessarily fully get that vibe. And when you did, it left you with other questions that were not really answered. Yeah, why do they keep doing this stuff? Why do they put their bodies on the line so much? Why do they do all these things? And the question is asked, but it's never really fully answered by the interviews with the wrestlers or anything. Just the same sort of vague platitudes that you've heard a million times before in other interviews with wrestlers. Also, I think the fact that it's focusing on so many different wrestlers really did make it so Blaustein wasn't really able to focus on the journey or the story of each wrestler in a balanced capacity. So there's a lot of times where you might want a little bit more Terry Funk and his story and what's going on with his family, but you're not going to get that because the documentary has to go back and see what's going on with Mick Foley, or what's going on with Jake the Snake now, or what's going on with these random little interviews with China and Spike Dudley and some of these other talents. Oh, let's see what's going on with this APW wrestling group and these two hopefuls, and see if they're going to make it in the WWF. And I like the idea of the documentary and what Blaustein is able to provide when it comes to any sort of clear narrative or subtext or commentary is interesting, but it's just not something that to me leads to like a 5-star match quality documentary. It just doesn't, because of just the way that things are written and the way that things are structured. It, it's almost like, I wouldn't say there's swerves or anything. This isn't like it's written by Vince Russo at his worst, but it's just one of those documentaries where it doesn't really have the best plan. It's just kind of jumping in the ring and just doing things. And sometimes what it does is pretty exciting and fun, and then other times it's a total flop. And that's kind of what happens when you don't really have what seems like a very clear idea of what you're trying to do with the documentary. And yeah, I can't talk about Barry without talking about the narration. He was a terrible narrator. I'm sorry. Like, he just didn't have charisma. He didn't have what it takes. He didn't have that spark. Uh I get what he's trying to do, make it more grounded, make it more connectable to fans of wrestling, but he just doesn't have a very high quality, high grade narrator voice. He just sounds like your average school teacher. Like, what is Mr. Blaustein doing narrating this wrestling documentary? Can you go back and teach history? Come on, man. What are you doing here? You know, it's that kind of vibe. When it comes to the other aspects of the film, like the cinematography by Michael Grady or the editing by Jeff Warner, it's okay. It's not anything really that amazing or jaw dropping or spectacular in that department either. It's just kind of just there, on the middle rung, so to speak. And definitely the best spots and like the best parts of this documentary, I don't even know if it's even stuff that Barry even really is responsible for, other than setting up the camera and recording these moments. The stuff with Mick Foley and his family, and getting to see Mick in a way that really made him into such a more dynamic and interesting person, showing that he really is a the complete opposite of mankind in reality. Like he's a super nice guy. He's chill, he's laid back, he's a good father, and to have that moment where Barry records his family reacting, his wife and his kids reacting to the brutal chair shots that he's receiving, the Royal Rumble match against The Rock, and then to show mankind that footage, and for Mick to actually, you know, feel something and actually sympathize with his family and actually see that different perspective and have it affect him. That was some pretty strong storytelling there. And I think Barry does get credit for that because he shot the reaction and he decided to show mankind, Mick Foley decided to show him uh, um, his family's reaction to him getting hit by those chairs. Um, and that didn't really come across as particularly exploitative, but the stuff with Jake the Snake really did. Like, I know what Barry was trying to do here, but I think there was a certain point where I think he really should have proceeded with a little more caution. Like, you didn't need to film the scene where he did crack cocaine in a hotel room and is just rambling. You didn't need to put that in the movie. You already got the gist of what's going on with Jake, with him trying to reunite with his daughter after all these years, and it just not really seeming right, and him opening up to his daughter and talk about, him being a fuck up and him, making all these mistakes, and him talking about what happened to his family and all these other things that have affected him and kind of led him to be where he is right now, and hi- who his father is and so on. You already had a lot of that in terms of peeling back the layers of Jake and showing him as a person, as a deeply troubled and flawed person, but as a person and not as a personality. You didn't need to have that bit with him in the hotel room. That just felt like it was cheap heat. um, the stuff with Terry Funk, if he actually did retire at WrestleFest, that would be something that would be a really eventful event to cover and to really document. Definitely a historic event, but it didn't turn out to be. So it just seemed like this was just another match that Terry Funk took part in. Um, but I will say the way that Barry set up Funk's arc was definitely, um, I would say, set up in a way that felt like there was more of an arc to it, and definitely had more of a clear resolution, despite the resolution turning out to be total uh, garbage and just another lie by Funk about him retiring and not wanting to wrestle anymore. The man went on and did like hundreds of matches after his so-called last match that was filmed in this movie. I mean, his last match was in 2017, and he passed away in 2023. May rest in peace. But the man didn't ever quit wrestling until he literally could not like walk anymore, or couldn't actually get in the ring. Um, on one hand, you can kind of commend him for that in terms of like the mental fortitude to keep doing it for so long. But on the other hand, it's just pure stubbornness and it's an unwillingness to realize that, you know, it's time to hang him up. But that's a problem that a lot of wrestlers deal with. And I think I think he could have explored that a little bit more. He could have went into that a little bit deeper, but he didn't want to push any buttons. He liked to. It seemed like he wanted to go deep with Jake the Snake, but he didn't really seem to go that deep with Terry Funk in terms of uh, why he's doing what he's doing, why he loves wrestling, why he keeps doing it. It just kind of just shot some footage while he was staying with Terry and his family, and shot some stuff during WrestleFest, and that's kind of about it. It didn't really seem like I really got to know Terry Funk that much as a person, other than he's a loving father and a family man, which is nice to see. The scene with him and his daughter when she's getting married. Um, but other than that, like you don't really get inside the psyche or the mindset of Terry Funk like you did with Jake the Snake, or even in some ways Mick Foley. Mick Foley. Who the fuck is Mick Foley? Mick Foley. Got too much funk on the brain. And Jesse Ventura, yeah, he's also interviewed, but like it's just a very brief interview, and you don't really get a whole lot out of that either. The Rock is there making his first ever film appearance, but it's just him spending some time with Mick's kids, and talking about what his plans are for the match, and that's kind of it. Vince McMahon, of course, is featured. This is the film where the viral meme clip comes from, where he's like, he's gonna puke, he's gonna puke. And man, the Vince McMahon scenes have aged like milk. Like you watch this documentary now, you're like, ooh. And there's people in the industry who work at WWF talking about how it's a great place to work, and Vince has a great culture, and you're just like, ew. It's knowing what Vince did later on in his career as the chairman and the VP or the head honcho at WWF, and all the stuff that's starting to come out. Uh, it was the opposite of a good corporate culture. That's all I gotta say. It was pretty crappy. Um, and draws like that is just really tragic. Um, it was nice to see draws, in good spirits, before the accident. Sadly, like right after they completed filming this, I think it was like 3 months later, he had the match where he wound up being paralyzed. Um, but yeah, it's one of those documentaries that you're not really gonna get a lot of history. Like if you're a novice with wrestling, you're not really gonna get a lot of like a rundown of the history of wrestling. Like that's not what you're gonna get from this. A lot of it's just kind of various little vignettes of different wrestlers, in terms of the day in the life of these wrestlers, and every now and then you might have some candid interviews with some other wrestler uh talent, wrestling talent. Sorry. Um it's almost like I got hit in the head with too many chair shots. How many flubs I'm making in this video. But I would say, while I didn't love it, I did like it. It was worth a watch. It was not too bad. I mean, especially I paid like I think it was 50 cents for this, or $1, which really wasn't much at all. And I definitely got $1's worth of entertainment out of it. I definitely would not watch this documentary again though anytime soon, because it's not really consistently compelling enough because of the lack of a clear narrative. Um, there was like a little round table here that was interesting, with Barry and Jesse Ventura and Mick Foley on the special features. Uh, Jesse Ventura is really bitter and jaded about wrestling, and Mick is. You could tell that it got pretty tense during that round table bit, where even Mick Foley is kind of trying to ease Jesse Ventura down a little bit, and Jesse's still not having it. Um, this is also pre-conspiracy theory Jesse Ventura, so it still seems like he has his head on straight, but he's still just as stubborn as ever. But it was fun. It was fun to see just those two talk with one another, those two legends. Um, but yeah, not a bad documentary, but I would definitely say there are better wrestling documentaries out there. I appreciate what it did in terms of kickstarting this new uh, trend, or this new type of wrestling content, because WWE itself would then carry this over with their own documentaries about their own wrestlers, and so would other filmmakers in the future. But it is one of those things where it's a humble beginning. But even at the same time, like Wrestling with Shadows is a much better movie, if you ask me. Much better wrestling documentary, and just a better film in general. Uh, but yeah, that's just my thoughts on Beyond the Mat. And until next time, I'll see you later.